Hey,
Okay. Can you hear
Hello.
me now? Can you hear me now?
hello, hello. How you doing?
Well, I'll be better when this is all over with.
Well, okay. We'll help you. We're
But
all ready. We're armed for bear.
what'd you say?
We're armed with all kinds of
Well,
brilliant
hold
thoughts.
on, and let me make sure I got the sound up on this thing. I'm using my iPad so it's easier today.
Yeah, the iPad works very, very well.
And
What were
this
you
way I
using
have room in
before?
front of me.
What were you using before?
Well, I just finally acquired the first laptop that I've had in 5 years.
Uh-huh.
And I use that for most of my classes. I mean, I was using this before I got that. And I am trying to learn the new stuff, you know, because it's different. Its Word is quite a bit different than what I used to use. And I'm just starting to use that. And it's a learning by doing, you know.
Yep.
But I have the laptop. I'd like to at some point maybe get into contact tracing from home. I have the laptop. I've got a new phone, the iPad that's going to have to be replaced at some point sooner rather than later. But you know, I'm by myself, so.
Oh, man. Yes, technology becomes more important, huh?
Oh, by the way, I almost sent you a picture of my kitchen because I like how neat your kitchen always looks. Or the view I can see of it.
No, it's pretty neat. But it's
I mean,
more, you
mine's
should,
got stuff on the counters more than I used to, but some stuff, it's not worth putting it away.
yeah, sure.
So how are you doing?
We're doing okay. We're doing okay. Let's see. I'm just seeing if anyone else is here yet. No, just us so far. How do you like Martin's background?
Did he change it?
No.
I'm still in China.
Yeah, you've been in China for a while.
Yeah, I'm not leaving.
You're not leaving? Well, first of all, the virus is way down there, so.
They won't let us in, probably.
Oh, nobody's going to let us in. And that's all right, because I can't find my passport.
Ha. You won't need it for a while.
Probably never, but. No, I don't like to think too much about how we could have done better on this, because it makes me very depressed.
Oh, it makes me very angry.
Angry is. And the latest is that the president, if he's reelected, wants to get rid of, by executive order, payroll taxes and what else was? Well, the payroll tax. And
Well, then they'll start cutting Social Security payments. It's fine.
yep, Social Security and Medicare.
Right.
And what's quite interesting, of course, is I would suspect a lot of his base depend on that.
They do. He doesn't care. He only cares
No,
about
he
rich
doesn't.
people.
Oh, you can see it's a different view. He doesn't care. And at this point, I'm glad I'm not young anymore, but I really feel for young people because they're going into a world that's far different from what they knew even 6 months ago.
So did you have anything you wanted Martin to put up? Like any notes?
No, I didn't.
All right.
I thought I might, but I didn't. In part
No,
because, yeah, in part because I'm trying to get used to using the Office 365 and it's taking me a long time.
Okay,
Do you have a Mac or a PC? What do you have?
It's a PC.
Okay.
Lisa's husband works for Toshiba. And from time to time, they're able to get Toshiba laptops and things that haven't been used. So he took everything that was on there off. I got a blank slate. And he and Mark Malikoff, mostly Mark Malikoff, helped me set it up. So it's nice having that. What do you hear from your family?
I'm trying to finish the last chapter.
Yeah, that was me.
Martin, I disagree with you. It's perfectly obvious that there are conclusions here. He's summarizing it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well
There
then
are
we can talk
conclusions.
about them. It's just the three of us so far. We're waiting for the rest.
Well, the conclusions kind of give affirmation to a point I'm taking and take it away. I mean, I found this a very difficult book. And I think the title is like, oh, it's going to be like some of the others, and it's not. And I struggled, so I hope people understand that.
Oh, yeah.
And as I told you, you are a very tough act to follow.
People forget. Nobody's thinking about last month. But thank you.
Oh, it's early yet.
Yeah, like I said, I'm just trying to get through these last couple of pages. I'm only inspired by deadlines.
I'm raising my hand and not virtually about that. And I think I have more to do now in some ways than I did before. Just keeping up with everything I'm going to and doing is a full-time job.
Yes, and all the continuing education and classes. I'll be back.
So it looks like you have a computer set up in the kitchen as well.
That's the iPad.
That's just because I saw a screen there.
Yeah, we have the computers in the study and the iPads in the den, wherever we need them. They rove.
My laptop pretty much sits, but everything else roves. And a while back, I bought the most incredible stand for an iPad or a phone, which is what I'm using right now. It's just, it's probably the best purchase I've made. What do you hear from your family, Martin?
Well, Daniel, he's doing this intensive class in Israel for 5 months. One of the students came down with COVID. So they put the class into quarantine for a couple of weeks. The person recovered. And so they're back in person. But, in Israel, they're much better organized than here. The whole class, what happened is they went home and they sent someone to his apartment to do a COVID test.
Oh, wow. I love that.
Yeah, they didn't make him line up in the street to do this. So they sent someone and he tested negative. But in Israel, they're far better than we are.
Well, as I've been saying recently, we become a third world country with stainless steel refrigerators.
Well, we're not a third world country. We have all this technology. What we are is we're socially inept.
Exactly.
We're
And
not capable of actually providing public services in the appropriate way because the people in charge don't care about the public. They only care about themselves.
you know,
What's happening.
we could have muddled through with previous things. He definitely was going to get reelected under those circumstances. This latest thing that he did yesterday, the $400 extra, if you read it, it's actually the states that have to set up a way of distributing it.
Well, they've
Nothing
got to
comes
also
from the
provide
feds.
money. It's not going to happen. It's all politics. It's all garbage.
Yeah, everything is politics.
It's not going to happen because he doesn't have the right to give money to the
No, he
states
doesn't.
anyway. He doesn't have money that the Congress doesn't authorize.
I used to think that he didn't know it, but I think he knows it, but he does this to convey to people.
I think he
that
may
don't
know it. He doesn't care. It creates the right press that
That's what
the
I'm
president's
saying.
doing something. That's all. He doesn't care about reality. He cares about what image he creates for himself.
And that's why I fear he's going to get reelected.
Yeah, well, right now he's trying to undermine the mail-in ballots, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he's trying to and he's trying to suppress all the intelligence information that indicates that the Russians are interfering again.
Mm-hmm.
Which is going on. People know it. They just, he just fires the intelligence people until he gets someone who basically will sit on the information, not divulge it to anybody.
And Barr, oh my God.
Well, Barr's a disaster.
That they keep saying that he probably has some kind of October surprise.
Yeah, I mean, he could, he talks about someone stealing the election from him. He's trying to steal the election.
Exactly. I mean, I'm doing mail-in voting. I've never done it before.
Well, we are as well. We did it for the primaries, so we're set up to do it.
Well, for some reason, my request for a ballot for the last primary, they never got it. So I couldn't vote in that.
Really early, and we got the ballot and we mailed it in. We did the whole thing. Well, I think what we'll do this time is we won't mail it in. Hopefully they'll put boxes up and we'll drive past.
Hey, that's what I'm hoping, but knowing this state, I'm not so sure.
Well, it's the county, right? And the county is
the county, yeah.
It's the county.
That's right. It is the county. I forgot.
I think the county
No.
will do that.
No, I've got to
boxes
call.
around town and you'll be able to throw them in a box.
When I found out that my request for ballot for the primary runoff hadn't gotten in, I actually spoke to a lovely woman in the election office. I was very impressed.
Yeah.
And she followed through with something she said she was going to do for me. And as soon as I get my ballot, and I think they start sending them out around the 19th of September, I'm going to mark it and get it done.
Yep.
Oh, good. Maybe nobody's coming.
Now, Sue will be here, I guarantee you. Guaranteed.
You know, that I know. Did you folks attend Friday Night Rock?
No. We usually have Shabbat dinner, and sometimes we do a Zoom with people. We can't be there at 6 o'clock. It's just the wrong time of day for us on Friday night.
I like the idea of it entirely being on Zoom because you get to see people I hadn't seen since March.
I mean, I've been on Zoom calls with 300 people. And
well,
they have Q&A and they do all that stuff. I mean, it can be done. You have to have people behind the scenes really managing it. That's all. It can be done.
Well, I've taken some international Melton classes. I'm taking one now that's a 2-session one dealing with aspects of American history. It's got like 300 people in the class, and I'm enjoying that more than some of the others. Maybe it's because it's a subject that's very interested in. But I did in an earlier class, there was someone whose name was Marcia Rickles, and I thought, oh my God, because my father's family is fragmented. And I did get in touch with her. And sadly, it's not my father's family, it's her husband's name. And her husband comes from St. Louis. And my father's family would have been all in New York. Had it been someone in New York, I'm sure it would have been a cousin of mine, which I haven't seen some of these people in, 50 years. So. Well, I'm not sure, obviously, what we're going to be doing for the high holidays. I don't know. They haven't divulged that.
Well, I'm being part of the group that's planning some of this stuff.
Oh.
Basically, what's going to happen is the early morning part of the service, Shachrit and the Torah service, can be like Shabbat morning. And then the Musaf is going to be David and the rabbi, and I don't exactly know what's going to happen for that, how it's going to work. But that's not part of the dialogue we're having because they're doing that. They're doing whatever they're doing.
Well, I have to say, it took me a while to get used to the Saturday morning services, but I'll sit in front of my computer. I have a copy of Sim Shalom. I don't know the Hebrew, so I follow it the way I would have followed it if I was present. And sometimes it feels like I'm actually there. I mean, sometimes you kind of like lose the sense of, oh, I'm not there. Well, one thing that won't happen, since the second day of Rosh Hashanah is on a Sunday, we would not be able to use Faith Lutheran's parking lot. And I'm told that when the holidays have come on Sunday, it's been a real interesting thing to find parking.
It's been a problem. Oh, let's see who's coming in. We just admitted the Lipmans.
Oh, good. Friendly audience.
There you go. Now we got 4 of us now.
Tomorrow there'll be more of us.
What?
We have a quorum. It's okay. 4 people's enough, Suzanne.
I was singing from Hamilton.
Oh, I haven't seen it yet. Maybe tonight, because I've been involved in other things. It's getting a lot of like negative publicity right now that bothers me. That he should have dealt more with the slave issue.
Well, the rabbi doesn't deal with contemporary issues particularly.
Good morning.
Morning, Eric.
Hi,
Look
Ron,
at
how are
you. Look
I'm
at you.
okay.
You're here.
Yeah, which I say a prayer of gratitude for.
Yes, there you are in the flesh.
It's as close to the flesh as we get nowadays.
Yep.
Now I have bald spots in my hair that had a result of the surgery I had, and kind of like it that nobody can see my back.
Well,
And I am so glad I had the surgery when I did.
oh
For
yeah.
a variety of reasons. I mean, prior to the surgery, I would have been more at risk than I am now, considerably more at risk.
Well, as long as we keep staying home, we're probably at minimal risk if we don't go anywhere. We're not able to go anywhere.
Yeah, but as time goes on, that's going to become psychologically more and more difficult.
I was talking to somebody last night about that subject.
Here comes Lisa Tremarchi. We got 5. We got a quorum.
Well, Lisa's a friendly face.
There you go. Here's Lisa somewhere. Yay! Here's Lisa.
Lisa, you're a friendly face, right? She must be muted.
She is muted, yeah. I asked her to unmute. Let's see if she does it. Lisa, unmute yourself. Yeah, there you go.
There I go.
There
You
go.
are a friendly face.
Oh, yeah, but my hair says I'm about to have a tantrum.
I actually like it.
Waiting so with bated breath for the opportunity to get a haircut.
Well, ask your husband to do it. I've offered Debbie. I've offered Debbie. She won't take me up on it.
Well,
I think she's being a little judgmental.
I let her cut my hair.
And I cut my husband's hair, but
Exactly. So what's the big
he
deal?
only wants the.
How about a little egalitarianism here?
Lisa, you have
Yeah.
a blank wall behind you.
I think it's because I'm on my desktop.
Oh,
and It
okay.
has a different camera.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
I like it better because I can see more of you.
Oh, okay. Well, that's why I combed my hair and put on a shirt.
Well, I'm on the
That's a
iPad, so
joke.
it's easier.
My son-in-law just said on examination of my closet, he posted in Facebook, I realized that I once thought it made sense to own 3 pairs of pants.
Was he talking about sweatpants or?
Well, then there's some of the responses were there's sweatpants, there's pajama pants, there's yoga pants. What's the problem?
Well, seriously though, I get dressed every day in, like what would be wearing ordinarily. I know some people that get dressed for Shabbat, even though they can't be seen. It's a psychological thing.
Yeah.
And I have to admit, I put a dress on today that I don't wear much, but I wanted to have a little bit of confidence.
There you go.
Listen,
Okay,
I
here
get
comes
dressed.
Renee Stern.
The upper half of me gets dressed.
There's Renee. We got a couple more minutes. We'll give people an extra minute to get in.
Who just came in?
Renee.
Renee.
Stern.
Oh, okay. I don't know. Hello.
Here comes Sue Resnick. Man, we are going gangbusters.
Sue Resnick,
Uh-oh.
you thought you'd be early, didn't you?
Hardly.
Oh, boy. No idea who else might come.
I'm sure.
That's the problem with life. You never know who else might come.
Can I write that
That's
down?
very profound.
You're getting more and more profound, which I find rather scary.
I don't know.
Hey, guess who's coming to book club?
Well, I talked to Sandra last night, and I think she was going to come.
Who's that?
Sandra is always late.
Well, I know
Yeah.
that.
Even
I
when,
know that.
even for Zoom,
Yes.
she's always late. Okay.
Well,
But you know
so
something,
she's
so would
like,
you respect her if she wasn't?
I don't think it's a
We're
matter of
trying
physical
to
space.
recreate through Zoom something akin to what we had before. Therefore, if she was not late, it would seem very weird.
anyways, it's you know what the motto for El Al is, the Israeli airline?
No.
El Al, every landing always late.
That's cute.
Well, that could be true for United also.
Oh, they're on time. They just don't treat their public very well.
No.
Our semi-hometown airline.
No, it's not our home. No,
I said,
it was nice. It was nice. when
Yeah, it was.
Continental.
Continent. Oh, I loved it.
What was
I'm not
nice?
going anywhere for a very long time, and Southwest is what I usually use these days. So,
Continental was very good.
oh, they
Yep.
were wonderful.
Yeah.
Yep. The United acquisition or merger did not do us good.
No, everything good about Continental just disappeared. with that merger.
Submerged.
Yeah.
And United says they're going to be laying off like almost half of their employees in October.
Well, almost everybody is.
Well, yeah, that's true.
Yeah. They
Well, I
weren't
mean, the airline
making money
industry-
when people flew, so.
Now, the reason we're having the pandemic, it gives Boeing a chance to fix the 737 MAX.
That's true. I hadn't thought about that.
That was the reason God sent the pandemic.
Well, then the pandemic needs to last a lot longer because I'm not sure I'd ever want to fly that again. I know.
God forbid.
Okay,
Why are
we'll
you
give
going-
another minute, Sue, and then we'll begin.
Yes.
How much time does Sandra need? Is she a full professor? What is she?
She'll be on in 10 minutes.
Oh, 10 minutes. We're not waiting that long.
She'll just join us.
Yeah.
But Sue, you know her well.
Yes. Yes.
So Ilana Kirshan, whom we know quite well, is doing a talk at 1:30 our time,
No, 12:30.
12:30 our time, sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.
12:30 our time on the Torah as panacea in time of pandemic.
Oh, unfortunately,
Direct
I'll be in a
from
book
Jerusalem.
club. I'll be in a book club, that's a book club directly after this. Otherwise, I'd love to hear that. Everything seems to come at the same time.
Well, Sunday is Sunday.
No, that's true.
Okay,
Well,
this is the
no,
Chaikas. We're
no.
going to start now. The Chaikas are joining.
Well, also she's in Israel, so it's late for her.
Ah.
Yeah.
Okay, everybody, we got a quorum. Let's begin. I'm not going to mute everybody. If we need to, I will, but let's leave it open. Let's try not to interrupt each other too much.
Yeah, and I will ask that you unmute it at some point. Okay, do you want me to start this?
Yeah,
I
you
don't
might
know
as well
what?
start at 10:33.
Good. Okay, I want to start out by saying I am not a scholar. My Jewish education as a child and a teen was quite minimal. I didn't have a bat mitzvah. They were not available in my childhood synagogue when I was bat mitzvah age. It would be a few more years. I don't know Hebrew. I stepped away from organized Jewish life in high school, and I only returned after moving to Houston, initially through the Houston Reconstructionist Havurah, later called Halev, and the Melton Adult Education class. At Melton, after I had the basic 2-year program, I concentrated as much as possible on classes that were history or text-based classes with a history component. And I'm defining history pretty broadly. So I read The Great Shift, or I read The Great Shift as a kind of history book. For me, it's a book attempting to answer the question why God communicated with some directly in earlier biblical days, but by the time of the Second Temple was more distant. And I'm going to mostly throw this out to to you folks. I will say that our author basically sees the change as going from to the idea of fixed status prayer. We're talking about the Second Temple time, and talking about a little bit more about the fate of individuals. But I'd like to throw it out because I did struggle a great deal with this book, and I don't think I was the only one. I'd like to throw it out, first of all, do folks see this as a history book? And if so, why? And if not, why? Don't all rush.
So Suzanne, I thought about this a bunch, and the whole premise of the book is this shift occurred.
Mhm.
And he talks about it as a shift in our conception of ourselves. of self,
Exactly.
right? That's his big premise. And yet he does not really provide a case for why this shift occurred. He states that it did, it clearly did, but why? And most times when you talk history, historians try to figure out what was the cause and effect relationship between things that were going on and what occurred, whether it's some kind of person that did something or changes in technology and cultural changes and what have you. And he disavows the notion that it was external, it's some kind of internal thing, and I don't get it.
I mean, he does. He actually does talk about many external factors, but he thought about. But what he said is that they're there. You can, have arm waving discussions about pictures.
Oh,
Yeah, about
I'm trying to figure out. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Are we okay?
I muted Lisa's dog.
Yeah.
Wait a minute,
Okay.
it was very
Well,
profound.
Are we ready now?
Yes, you're back.
Okay, we could have arm waving discussions, and he says there are many possible external factors, but it was the what he's looking for is the missing link in that change within us that shows this change, through through the literature produced in these periods. He doesn't disavow the external things, but you can argue till the cows come home, assert this, that, or the other, you wouldn't be any closer to know why it happened. I often wonder if the best thing that a better approach might be a cross-cultural approach, and that looking at the Near East as a civilization,
Mhm.
see what just happened not only in ancient Israel, but are there comparable changes in Babylonia? Are there comparable changes in Assyria, where you can see this sort of change in consciousness? Because he does at the beginning of the book about the Akkadians and the Mesopotamians.
Correct. Mhm.
So why, maybe a cross-cultural approach to see if this change was happening generally in the Fertile Crescent, moving away from a temple-centered kind of worship to something which was more remote, more internalized, not just among Jews, but among everybody.
Do you think we would have moved away had the temple not been destroyed?
Well, it's funny you should mention that because
That's my job.
no, I think definitely the destruction of the temple certainly I think was an important factor in spurring in accelerating the change. And I think when I look at a lot of the the Second Temple period writings and early post-biblical that he cites, a lot of them are, a number of them seem to be about ancient figures, but you could see them when they're applying to the loss of the first temple. Well, they just lost the second one. You see, it's a thinly veiled way of coping with the loss of the second temple. But I actually there's a question that Martin keeps bringing up every week, which I can't understand. How this guy is orthodox and and takes the view that he does. But one of the things that I kind of blundered into really was I realized that, you know, for the kind of book he's writing, he actually makes no use of documentary hypothesis whatsoever, which I thought was very striking, because there are places in the book where you kind of see that he does see the validity in it, but he never does take that approach. And when you do, and I happen to just purely coincidentally, I read for the first time while we were reading this, I read Friedman's Who Wrote the Bible. And what struck me was that the you know, J, E, D, and P, the four main, you know, authors, you know, it's one thing, you know, that essentially that wrote the Bible, that the redactor put together.
Mhm.
You know, it's one thing to take the view, Kugel seems to take the view that the Torah was there. The 5 books of Moses were there, and people, you know, people sort of, it was there as a resource, and when people suddenly felt that they needed to have a scripture there it was to study. When suddenly there was a need to make religion very individual, where people would need to perform these mitzvot, there they were all there. But if you look at it from the documentary hypothesis point of view, each of those people who wrote the stories of the Bible had their own sensibilities, their own sense of selves, and all. And I want to just quote Friedman here. J, E, and B picture God in very personal ways, moving around on the earth, taking visible forms, engaging in discussion and even debate with humans. P's conception was more of a cosmic transcendent deity, which, you know, Kugel writes is more towards the Second Temple period. That's what became dominant. But if you look at when P was written, according to Friedman, this was in the time of King Hezekiah or soon thereafter. So you're looking at 720, perhaps 720 BCE or soon thereafter. So I think that there's a shift that's taking place. There is this great shift, but it's over a much longer period of time, with a much greater extended period of time of the coexistence of these very different sensibilities, these very different senses of self. Because if if Leviticus, all these laws, was written by an Aaronid priest sometime during the time of King Hezekiah, well before, you know, by Kugel's time, any of this was supposed to have been taken place, it means that this sensibility was developing alongside this other God just behind the curtain, ready to cross over sensibility. And you look to it like the Joseph story at the very beginning, where you know, he's contrasting that with, what was it, Abraham, you know, just, you know, with God crossing the curtain. Both the Joseph story and these earlier stories were primarily written by J and E. So even within one, you know, even within one biblical or two biblical writers, you have this combination of sensibilities. So, I mean, this is a much more complicated process than I think even Kugel submits here. So anyhow, I'll shut up now. I've talked long enough.
No, thank you. I think you brought up some very good points. He is not particularly clear about time periods. And well, is time linear is something that's debated all the time, no pun intended. But for someone like myself, whose knowledge of the religious aspects is a lot more minimal than I would like, I think that was part of the struggle with this book. I think he promises something that, for me, I didn't get. And I'd like to know what others may think about that.
Suzanne, this is Etta.
Yes, Anna, hi.
Morning. What is he promising that you didn't get?
Well, and this is he doesn't actually say this, but this is my reading of it. He's promising, to my mind, kind of an explanation of why we went from a God who would talk directly, maybe appear in some fashion to people like Abraham, to Moses, to a time period when that didn't happen. And he says somewhere in the end, towards the end rather, that during the Second Temple period, sometimes people would get, or they'd say they'd get visits from angels, but they didn't directly hear from God. And he also talks about how this, concept came in early Christianity. And I was hoping, maybe from the title, I don't know. You should know better than to go by titles. But I was hoping to get a clearer explanation of why he believes in this. Instead, he throws in a lot of documentation that doesn't necessarily answer my question. And that's one of the reasons I found the book frustrating.
I think
Go ahead.
I think he doesn't show why. I mean, I agree with you, and that's what Martin said as well. But he does show that it happened, which is not something that I think we would have thought of before we read the book. That there is an evolution amongst the Jewish people of our relationship with God, or people's relationship with God. I don't think it's even not the people, but individuals.
Right.
With God changes wildly. I don't think he doesn't necessarily answer why, except to say this is what happens over time. This is what has happened. It's not one. It never happened at once. There was never a bang. Whoops. We're on to the next chapter. He shows each type of relationship evolving into the next over time, and sometimes it was a very long time.
He does have sort of an explanation in that he talks about the fact that there's a change in the sense of self, that the idea of a kind of unenclosed, a permeable self versus that's more part of a community versus a very individualized, rational self, and suggests a possible Greek influence. So he hints at, but doesn't insist on a vague explanation.
Well, I think that he does give pretty detailed explanation at times. He uses, particularly at the last chapter too, he uses the, strivings of many anthropologists to say that, this idea of a self is very different depending on your culture and traditions that have been passed down. And it still is to this day. I mean, there's still people that transcend, I've been to Jewish renewal things, you don't have to just go to Samoa or Tahiti or some other place where people, have in many ways, I know a rabbi, a very well-respected rabbi that leads tours where they go on these, trance journeys. So this idea that you go into an altered state of consciousness in order to have more, I don't know if you call it contact or more influence from the divine that is beyond your usual consciousness, is not something that is foreign to our modern Judaism. I mean,
Well, maybe even the whole Hasidic.
It's not just the people out there in those islands that go into a trance state. Now, they may do it more often ritually than we do. We're still stuck in this Christian idea that we're going to stand in a pew and we're going to access God by saying these very ancient words of, thank you. I mean, the conservative and reform got rid of this, but thank you for letting us bring our animal sacrifices to the temple. I mean, 2,000 years ago, we're still saying that in a lot of synagogues. So there's a variety in Judaism of what's acceptable now in this world to be Jewish.
Mhm.
And how that contacts with, quote, this other, whatever we call it. I mean, God has 42 names in the Torah itself of how to think of or imagine this whatever you call it, this belief, this divine, if you want to call it an entity or a divine, energy or whatever you want to call it. There's certainly, I think, been a great shift from, but I think we're going back to it because the age of rationality hasn't gotten us a lot of places where Judaism wants to be these days.
Yeah, I think I would just like to say that I find Friedman very annoying. I feel like he puts things together like building blocks, chunk, 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 chunk. And I feel like
Which Friedman?
Richard Elliott Friedman
Richard Elliott.
was cited earlier.
Yeah.
I understand now why you were a little late, because you've been at the Kotel all this time.
Yeah, I've been davening and I had a real experience this morning with a computer that didn't work because it wasn't charged. What do you know? God just would not charge my computer overnight without electricity,
I think
Okay.
that was probably because you were on the phone with me for too long, maybe.
Okay, but I think what Kugel is trying to do is not find causes. It's not causational, it's correlational.
Right.
And it helps us think about, not take for granted the view of God that maybe most of us were presented with growing up. God is here, there, everywhere. You can't touch or see God. Everybody knows that, those sorts of things. What I found very enlightening throughout this was there is the concept of God and the concept of self seem to have evolved together, and to the point where, and I think this is maybe less true now than it was in the 20s or 30s, earlier in the last century. It was very important for Judaism to be rational. I mean, until the Hasidim got here after World War II,
Right.
we were very big on decorum and rationality and studying other peoples and how our Torah related to the Akkadians and the Sumerians and whatever. We very much were intellectualizing it. Okay, not sure how to handle that. Okay, so, and I sometimes feel like Kugel is not operating with the Jewish renewal, New Age. I mean, I think sort of he got to this point in his life without really being in contact with that stuff. So, those of us who grew up, let's say in the 60s, and we were hit by all of the, let's say, Alan Watts, Timothy Leary stuff, is like,
Well, neo-Hasidism,
Right,
Almond
right.
Chapter,
Okay, so,
neo-Hasidism.
like,
It's just
what's
because the Hasids got here later than the Mignogdim, as Martin
what I'm
said a few weeks ago.
Okay, but I feel like Kugel is solidly in the rational tradition, and what he's reaching for is something like, what did we lose? I mean, which he even says, like, in his conclusion, thanks to the reconfiguring of what was once the semi-permeable mind, our complicated modern psyche has been purchased for a sky emptied of angels. Okay.
Do you think we may have gained anything?
Well, penicillin,
Oh, that's not what I.
plumbing. I don't
Yeah,
think
well,
we
plumbing
gained
is an important
any
thing.
spiritually. No.
Let
I-
me rephrase that question.
Okay.
Do you think that we may have gained anything in how we deal with God, how we deal, with this outside factor? Because I agree with you, he obviously, and I have to say, I sort of like that way of looking at things from my history background. But do you think, you talked about what was lost when you didn't have the direct communication with God. Do you think we have gained anything by not having it?
No, I think it's possible to have it or reach for it. That the passage from Flannery O'Connor at the very end, God, I
That was
want,
wonderful. That was wonderful.
right,
Yes, King-
ourself overshadows. As long as we're tied up in ourselves, we're overshadowed. We overshadow the ability to be in contact with God. Now, Martin is very politely raising his hand here, so I feel like, Suzanne, would you call on Martin, please?
Martin, will you take over from your wife?
So
Will you speak?
obviously the change he describes took place. I'm not disputing that for 1 second. The question is, what choice did we have? If you think about, we centralize in the land, we build a temple. Then we get schlepped off to Babylon. Then we come back and rebuild it. Then we get the Greeks and we get the Romans and we get all these people, and some of us land up in Italy. We get schlepped off to Rome, and we start physically moving away from the temple. The temple is no longer a focal point. Well, if the focal point of your religious experience is the temple, and you don't really have that focal point anymore, then you have to adapt or die, one or the other. And we adapt by adopting new practices. And these practices started long before the temple was destroyed. Because when Yochanan ben Zakkai asked the Romans to let him out of Jerusalem and said, let me out of here, let me take my scholars to Yavne, and let me create an academy, there must have been scholars that he brought with him to Yavne. So this whole thing of scholars, of rabbis, quote unquote, analyzing and debating and considering what we are, must have been going on in order for Yochanan ben Zakkai to create an academy in Yavne with somebody.
Sure, the beginning with the interpreters of the Torah when Ezra read the scroll.
Exactly. So this process has been going on in parallel with the temple practices. And then the temple's gone. So what do you got left? Just these other things that were going on.
And I think many people do not realize that there were other practices going on even during the temple time. Because you're caught in your basic courses, everything was centered on the temple. And it was, but there were other places where people would bring their sacrifices because they couldn't get to Jerusalem, etc. And do you think, because I don't, that he necessarily mentions that or makes that clear? With, which is another issue that I had with the book. But another question that I have is, and I started to say this earlier, but I don't know that it was answered. If the second temple had not been destroyed, we continued to have sacrifices and everything, do you think what he's talking about, given that it started before that, would have continued?
Ed had his hand up.
I can't
Yes,
see the
I
hands that are up, so.
I think it would have continued mainly because, we had this whole group in Qumran that was doing stuff. There must have been other groups all around. There were Jews in Egypt, there were Jews, in Greece and all around, and they were coming up with different things also. to me, I found the book a little complex, but if I step back, what I see is here was somebody very orthodox, and all of a sudden, people are standing on the moon. And how do you talk about, the sky, God, and all of that, if all of a sudden this universe is much more complex than the rabbis or anybody talks about? And I think he's having problems with that, and he's trying to put it together. Okay, and on the other side, here we have modern people who see this complex universe. How can they believe in a supreme being? So, as Jews, we're screwed on each end. If we come from the Orthodox, we have to worry about this big, universe that's not really described. And if we're secular, in the sense that, we've been brought up with all this science, how can we put our faith into a God who supposedly is so good and controls good or bad? And this is why when you talk to an Orthodox person, you ask them where God was during the Holocaust, they don't answer that. They go, God has some sort of a plan, et cetera, et cetera. So, what we are doing as Jews, at least what I'm trying to do, is trying to balance, how do I look at the science, the background that I come from, and have faith in a God who's supposedly so good and so all-knowing. So, from both sides, Suzanne, you're not going to get an answer. None of us are going to get an answer. I'm sorry.
Well, I didn't think so. I know this group, but
Anna has her hand up.
I think, one thing that we're not discussing, and that I don't know that he certainly doesn't mention it directly, but mainstream Judaism is what he's looking at.
Mhm.
He talks about in the post-biblical times, or Second Temple times, as Christianity is developing, that there are other groups doing other things, and ultimately one will become Christianity, and we don't care that they had prophets. That's not mainstream Judaism. So he's only looking at mainstream Judaism, and only recently, and I guess that's probably a couple hundred years, have we really had plurality within Judaism, where you have lots and lots of thoughts. And those of us around this table think that Judaism and plurality go together, when in fact, orthodoxy, I don't think it's called orthodox for a reason. I don't think it's because it accepts that lots of other views are appropriate. Certainly not lots of other ways of practicing are appropriate. And I think views are okay as long as you practice. Just like Mordecai Kaplan turned the Jewish world on its ear. It took him a long time to do so, but he was also excommunicated for having done that because there was a mainstream Judaism and everything else wasn't Judaism to that group of people, to the Orthodox Jews. And so he's trying to keep it within a mainstream Judaism in terms of our reading of it, is what I see.
Yeah.
because that's what his background is. Yeah.
Well, look,
Eric.
we have so much diversity in our history of the last, since, quote, exile, the second exile. And we have, what they believed in Russia following false messiahs at different times, what we believed in Sephardic communities in certain places was different than what we believed in the Anglo-Saxon places. We're not even talking about the people that we now call Jews from Ethiopia and that we didn't even know about for many centuries. So I don't think there's one, when we're talking about 2,000 years, we're not talking about people that just agreed with, and we were only in places like Germany for 700 years compared to 2,000 years. So, we don't have one idea about what Judaism became. Now, we as mostly Ashkenazic, some Sephardic background Jews of the last 200 years have more of a somewhat consensus, but there's when I was a student at Hebrew University, I interviewed people who had just come from Bukhara, southern Russia, which is part of Samarkand in some places, and they had a lot of different ideas about how you worship rituals and God. And I did a whole paper on just their folklore. So that's not really true that we have one orthodoxy that went on for 2,000 years. That's not true.
Peter mentioned in the chat about the Karaites, and I know I'm not pronouncing it correctly, as another group.
I just want to disagree with you to the extent that they are not his audience, and they are not today still part of Judaism. When we split off most recently, that is the Judaism that he is addressing, and his looking at the Bible, at man's relationship to God, he's not taking into account the influence of the Ethiopian community on the Jews of Ethiopia, and therefore what their perception is of God. He's looking at the Judaism that we've learned, which is Eastern and Western European. So that, yes, of course, there were always different ideas and different ways of doing it, but they weren't always acceptable. And certainly they didn't survive mainstream the way Judaism as we know it did. And we'll call it rabbinic Judaism. And now rabbinic Judaism has split away. And there was plenty, and I guess my point is, there was a lot of non-rabbinic Judaism that happened over history. And you had Jews following other Mashiachs and stuff, but they didn't survive as Judaism. That's all.
Okay.
In other words,
Eric,
go ahead.
no, just that Eric has.
Eric has his hand up.
No, I mean, just hearing it's kind of an irony that a great deal of the texts that Kugel cites were not canonized. They're apocrypha, pseudo-epigrapha.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's looking at I mean, he did talk about, Book of Job, Kohelet, Song of Songs, but, he has focused a great deal on texts that did not become a part of our Torah to get insight into what was going on at that time. So, there's a tacit acceptance that there's this very diverse community out there with a great many ideas and texts that were important to them that did not make the cuts, into our own Torah. In fact, I think that Kugel, part of that, I think, is that because they weren't canonized, I think Kugel had no problem analyzing them to the full extent. There was no sacred components to them. Therefore, he could go at those texts.
But he's looking at it as being transformational, not a departure.
Exactly.
From this. So that's why he feels safe to be talking about that. From this.
Exactly.
And it's more encompassing for this to be transformational in that regard.
Yeah, transformation is the term that he uses rather than the change. So, I mean, that kind of makes the title The Great Shift, it takes away a little bit from it, because the great shift implies more of a complete change. And, you know, if you look at this, like, okay, we went from talking to God to not talking to God. But transformation, I think you're right. He can bring in other things that are not part of the canon, and he can make his interpretations. And I think it's very, very important.
And now, Debbie.
Okay. All right.
I'm
well,
sorry, I can't see
No,
people.
no, no. I think
Everybody-
somebody else should, whether Sue or Martin, somebody needs to watch the hands because it's.
I'm watching you.
please
You
do,
watch.
'cause
You and I have been watching like hawks.
Okay, so hand. Okay. So first of all, I'm not sure that Kugel goes at the Torah as well. Maybe I'm thinking of other books of his that I've read, but I think he would be very free to say that the Torah comments on itself, that the Torah doubles back on itself, that there's, you know, reference within the Torah to other parts of the Torah. So I'm not sure he's treating it as so sacred and untouchable. But I mean, to me, I really think his goal from beginning to end was to just get his readers to absorb what these other states of mind are. The state of mind in which God is right at the other side of the curtain. The state of mind in which God answers the prayers of the brokenhearted. That these are states of mind that our ancestors operated within. And even the other states of mind where God can live simultaneously in a statue and in a jewel and in another city. I mean, I just, to me, I found that was like the most interesting part.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think he says, okay, there were technological changes. And I think that there's been this trend that, you know, as we realize that illness is not caused by demons, but rather by bacteria, you know, except for demons like COVID, which is definitely a demon. I mean, don't get me wrong. But that as we come to understand that there's more and more of our existence that we can control.
Yes.
Right?
Mastery
That's the
over
benefit of modernity. That we've let our sense of self grow and grow and grow to the point where we're not able to be conscious of God on the other side of the curtain. And I'm just remembering something Judy Abrams said years ago. She, in a meditation class she taught, she said, Jewish meditation is not about going into another form of existence. Jewish meditation is like being able to walk around all the time aware of holiness, which is a difficult state of mind to cultivate. I wouldn't say I've cultivated it, but I think in a way that's what Kugel is putting his finger on, that people, maybe because they didn't know about penicillin, but maybe because there was something very good about that frame of mind. Okay, and I also want to say the whole thing about where was God, that's, I think, another part of the development. You know, people were pretty upset by the destruction of the Second Temple and the First Temple and exile. And I have read that the destruction of the Second Temple was a worse catastrophe than the Holocaust. So given that that catastrophe was encountered 2,000 years ago, that all of the Jewish thinkers since then have struggled with this, why did God let this happen? And come to, struggled with it. It doesn't mean, oh, now we know. Now we figured it out. They were stupid. We're smart. When the Holocaust happened, then we realized there is no God. Let's get over it. All right. There were probably people saying that 2,000 years ago, but there is a chain of thinking and tradition that struggled with it up until now. So I don't think it's so easy to dismiss by saying we had a Holocaust, so that's it. All right, I'm done.
Can I just throw out one quick question before going to some other things, you know, to sort of wrap this up so we're not in the middle of talking. the pandemic, and you just mentioned it, Debbie. Well, you know, it's what we're thinking of. Otherwise, we would have been sitting around the table very close together in the boardroom, and it would have been on a Saturday. Has the pandemic, did it influence the way you read this book? Was it in your mind? And you know, just a quick answer, because that could go on for hours, and we don't have that kind of time. But does anyone want to check me up on that?
Quick answer, no.
Yeah, because it just reinforces the fact that we think we're in control, but we are not in control. And you know, the world keeps coming up with things that we are just for sure not in control of. So that's my thought on that. Martin.
So a thought about, I'm just trying to get the context straight with Kugel. So here we have an Orthodox Jew.
Here we go.
Who taught at Harvard, right? Spent most of his career at Harvard, teaching biblical criticism in the tradition of the biblical criticism that arose in the 19th century in Germany. That's where it came from. His whole book is predicated on a Western state of mind. He's not talking about what kind of God exists in China or India or Japan or any other place. He's only talking about Western civilization, really, which is a kind of a narrative, which is why he doesn't particularly relate to Sephardic communities in the Jewish community. Not really. So it's this Western intellectual tradition that somehow we have become swept up in, and it's become the basis for our conception of God as being.
I think that's.
So I think that's I think that's where he's coming from. The question about where does he think he is? How does his Orthodox Judaism practices fit in with his intellectual role as a professor at Harvard and then at Bar Ilan in Israel? He doesn't really answer that question ever. People ask him that question constantly. And he basically says the two have nothing to do with each other, which is kind of bizarre. Because how many minds does he have? Was it the left side of his brain, the right side of his brain, maybe the middle of his brain? But in any case, so he is limited by being part of Western culture, I think. The book is predicated on a Western view of the world.
I would like to read a quote. We can continue on after this, but a couple of days ago, an obituary was brought to my attention. Again, a Harvard professor of early American history, whose last name is Bailyn. And at the end of the obituary, I'm going to read this. He put together a book. He just died, and he put together a book earlier this year. In an epilogue, he cautioned, as he often did, against imposing our own sense of certainty on the confusion of the past that was actually lived or experienced by those who lived it. The inescapable fact, is that we know how it all came out, and they did not.
Wow.
I just want to say that, you know, for me, actually, one of the problems of reading the Siddur, and I'm still always working with it, is the fact that it's a different, you know, the God of the Siddur is very one who will ruin your crops if you don't do the right thing.
He's the early God.
You know, so it's quite clear, you know, at one time, the Jews were very successful militarily, and it must have been because God was on our side. And, you know, so things were going very well. And then only later did we have to face the problem that Debbie mentioned, you know, that things were not going so well. And there are only so many answers to that. You're having hard times because you have sinned. You're having hard times now, but you'll do well in the next life. Or the Job explanation at the end, who can understand the ways of God? So there are only so many answers there. But in any case, it's quite clear when I read the Siddur that, and then when I go to a more contemporary renewal service, that the renewal service meets where a conception of God that I can live with a little better than that he'll spoil my crops, which is in our traditional Siddur. So it's always been obvious to me that the conception of God has been changing.
Thank you, Peter.
I want to know what the Chaikas keep laughing about. They're having an awfully good time over there.
Oh, I haven't seen them. Let me.
It is tickling Glory's knee, and
Let me pull this up.
What
Oh
are you?
yeah, well they're always laughing. That's okay.
Unmute.
Yeah.
Unmute.
I mean, we're all grappling with the same issue, and I think Peter, says it for me. I don't like saying it. That's why I like the Reform service over the Orthodox or the conservative one. I don't believe God is, killing my crops or any of these other things that they talk about. It is not talking to me. It is not talking to the present. And, all my life for me is trying to juggle the fact that I believe in a God, and I have no idea what the hell that means. I mean, because I come from I wouldn't say intellectual, a scientific background. And, I hear us talking. And by the way, when we talk about, Judaism and Orthodoxy, I remember, Hasidim was a push against the very traditional rabbinical services, rabbinical, intellectual, what was going on in Judaism in the 17th century. And now we have basically what we call Orthodox being taken over completely, as far as I'm concerned, with Hasidim or their branches, whether you call them Satmar, Lubavitcher, et cetera. And now we're trying to be Orthodox without this Hasidic type of whatever you call it, Judaism.
Eric.
Well, just a little defense of our prayer book. Cantor Levine describes our prayer book as a kind of a tell.
Talk nice to each other.
Kind of a tell. In other words, basically, nothing is ever disposed of. Layers are added to layers. And you're digging through the layers so that something that may not meet our present conception remains there, but it's always there to come back to. And it actually is documenting, the changes through time that have taken place in Judaism. But I just want to get back to something, a specific change, when Kugel's discussion of collective punishment back in the beginning of what we were reading this week, where he was talking about the notion, he was finding the notion of, basically people were viewed as members of clans, not as individuals, but then he was talking about the notion of punishment and how the notion of basically you would be punished for your parents' sins, it would be visited on the third, fourth, fifth generation, and that basically that was removed. Basically, you're responsible for your own sins. And I thought, on the one hand, that was actually a terrific explanation of how bad things happen to good people. You could be perfectly good, but if your great-grandfather was a monster, of course you're going to get, crap happening to you. And I thought that's a hell of a good explanation. And it took a lot of guts to remove that because it made them naked. All right, you took that away from us, so why do bad things happen to good people?
And
Well,
on
if
the
we
other
could,
hand, I'm sorry, on the other hand, if,
no, you can be compare and contrast.
Lisa,
yes, if your succeeding generations are going to be punished for what you do, then why should your grandchildren, etc., why should they try to do anything and follow what's in the Bible? Because they're going to get hurt anyway.
Well, the righteous are supposedly, they're supposedly favored by God too.
and in the Siddur with Adonai Adonai, which we say on Chagim, the end of the sentence which says that has been knocked out of the Siddur.
Right, right.
It's in the Torah, but it's not in the Siddur. They knocked out the part that the succeeding generation suffered. They took that out specifically.
Can I just make one comment, because we are getting kind of late. The last line in the book, we've touched on this in this entire discussion. The divine accommodations have kept changing. It says, actually it starts since the time of King David, in fact, starting well before then. The divine accommodations have kept changing, and it's not over yet.
Okay.
So I guess, do we see this as a kind of history?
That's a great question.
I think it's a somewhat historical book. I mean, I think he includes a lot of his own, which is different. It's not just, the kind of factual interpretation, but he, asked questions. I thought his questions were pretty probing questions at times, now that stage of supposed rationality of unbelief and understanding and, and then there's the counter rationality movement. I think that I thought it was, pretty good historical look at some of the important influences. Yeah.
Debbie, and then we're going to have some summary comments and announcements.
Okay, I think historical, but not in the sense of this caused that, but as an attempt to just say, let's look at the history of concepts of God, like a correlational kind of history, maybe, which is less egotistical maybe than writing a history in which you say that this happened because of that. So that was my thought.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, Sue, any announcements before we...
I think you'll all agree that this was a great choice for a book. And we have 14 books that have been nominated for our next rounds. So
For the next great choice?
Yeah, right. So I've sent that out. I'm going to send out one more, and then the poll will be going out on the 24th of August, and you'll have roughly a week or so to vote, or maybe it's I think around the 18th or something. I'm sending it out, and then you'll have a week to vote, so you'll have a chance to take a look at the books, and we'll decide. It'll just be like, the greatest number of votes will be whatever the next book or books will be. So there's
no electoral college.
No electoral college.
Mail-in ballots?
None. For
Yeah, I
this.
was going to ask mail-in ballots. So they
Mail-in ballot. Vote early and often, but you can vote for up to 5 books. So that'll be nice. Number 2, I put in the chat that the JTS is doing a series in preparation for the High Holy Days about faith and prayer. From this, the classes are free, and they're asking for a donation, so you can sign up for that. And I'm happy to send that around. We have the Sean thing. I did send this out to everybody in the IBC and the adult.
Oh,
ed.
okay.
And if you did not receive it from this, did anybody?
The letter starts in 1 hour from now.
Yeah, it starts at
So-
12:30.
Yeah, it's in
Okay.
1 hour from now. You've got to
And
sign up to get in, so you've got to send them a,
right. So I can put that in the chat if I
Okay,
need
I'll
to.
leave the chat open for a while.
Okay, and the last thing is next Sunday is my final thing on Proverbs. So because we're going to run into the High Holy Days, so we're going to have the class for an hour and a half. We're probably not going to go for the full hour and a half, just so you know. But that's how that's going to go. And then Peter, what is the class that you're teaching after me?
I'm going to teach a course on Jewish languages, not a course, a discussion of Jewish languages.
Jewish languages.
Peter, that will only start in October because in September we can do a book club before Rosh Hashanah, but the third week is day 2 of Rosh Hashanah.
Right, and
So we don't have adult ed that week. We have the next adult ed will be in October.
That's fine. It'll give me more time to prepare.
Okay.
Right, and I'll have the dates for that, for this, and also the September readings for the High Holy Days. I will be sending those out in a couple of weeks. I'm still collecting some links.
Okay.
So that's it. Any questions, any answers?
Well, I want
Your
to
class
thank
is
everybody.
On Sunday.
Sunday.
Thank
I
you.
know this is
Awesome.
well enough to know that this is a good format. And I think we did answer the question. I went into it thinking it as a history, but I think I was looking at it as a more linear history. And obviously it is not a linear history because nothing in Judaism is linear.
Oh, absolutely.
Suzanne, thank you. Your question.
Thank you very much.
prompted a
Terrific
really-
job of moderating.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's because
Well, I have to tell you, this was not an easy one to put together.
Well,
And
you did a
see
great
how
job.
well it went.
You've done good.
And could you send out, Sue, stuff that's in chat? I have to leave quite quickly because I have something else. So could you send out all of that information like in an email?
Yes.
Okay.
For the class, I'm thinking in terms of the course, not today's, but the
Yeah.
course that you're talking
Now,
about.
if you want the Kirshan thing, you're gonna have to act quickly to sign up and then log in because you can't sign
Okay.
because they send you a specific login when you signed up.
Yeah,
As more and more do.
right.
Well, thank you, everybody. This is
Okay,
always
everybody.
Thank
an
you.
excellent thing
Thank
to
you.
go to.
Thank you.
Okay, bye,
Take
everyone.
care.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye. Be well. Stay safe.
Yes, yes. All right.
And the moderator has to leave, so thank you. Peter, I didn't acknowledge you. Great. Everybody, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And thank you, Martin.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
It's open until you're all gone before I close the meeting officially.
I just figured out when you have, that shows how smart I am. I just figured out when you have 9 people or 12 people, it looks a lot like Hollywood Squares.
Or the Brady.
If you have an
Brady
iPad,
Bunch.
if you have a
Brady
computer,
Bunch.
I wanted to point to the person below me, you know.
And then
if you have a computer, you can get up to 25 on a sort of a low-end computer. If you have a really powerful computer, you can get 49.
Wow.
Oh, Jubilee. Okay.
Wait, 49, is it the computer or is it the size of the screen?
No, you have to have a graphics card that supports a screen that
Yes.
does it.
Mon, I was proud of you saying that Debbie gets the last word. That makes a good marriage.
That happens with, I don't even have to say it. It's just obvious.
Very funny.
Bye-bye.
Take care, everybody.
Bye,
Bye.
everybody.
Bye. See you all next week.
Hi, Debbie.
Yeah, bye.
Bye.